Aileen Wuornos, born in 1956, was an American serial killer who murdered 7 men between 1989 and 1990 in Florida. She claimed the killings were in self-defense against sexual assault while she was working as a prostitute. Arrested in 1991, she was convicted and sentenced to death, ultimately being executed by lethal injection in 2002. Her life was marked by severe childhood abuse, homelessness, and crime. Her case drew widespread media attention and inspired films, including Monster 2003, starring Charlize Theron.
Some faces haunt your dreams. Some voices echo in your mind long after the credits roll. And sometimes, just sometimes, an actor slips so completely into madness that you forget he's only playing a part. Meet Bill Moseley, the smiling nightmare of American horror. But long before he terrified audiences across the world, Bill was just a kid with a wild imagination. And no one, not even him, could have guessed what was waiting around the corner. Born in Stamford, Connecticut in 1951, Bill wasn't raised in the heart of Hollywood or on the edges of horror. No, he grew up in a suburban world of Sunday papers and white picket fences. His early life was ordinary, until it wasn't. Fascinated by monsters, Halloween, and the dark corners of American culture, young Bill devoured horror films and spooky stories. But unlike most kids who outgrow their monster phase, Bill carried his fascination like a badge of honor. It was a flickering candle he would protect against the winds of normalcy. College came next, Yale University no less. Not exactly the breeding ground for horror icons, but the real world bored him. After graduating, he worked odd jobs, writing for magazines, making ends meet, floating through life like a drifter searching for a purpose. That purpose would arrive in the strangest, bloodiest way imaginable. In 1986, Bill Moseley stepped into the skin of Chop Top in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. And just like that, a legend was born. With a bent metal plate on his head, a coat hanger for scratching, and a voice that sounded like rusty nails scraping against bone, Chop Top wasn't just another horror villain, he was unforgettable. Audiences didn't know whether to laugh, scream, or run. And that was the magic. Bill had created a character so disturbingly magnetic that you couldn't look away. But success wasn't instant. After Chainsaw 2, Bill found himself in the all-too-familiar Hollywood trap: typecasting. Directors didn't know what to do with him. Too weird for leading man roles, too intense for background characters. For years, Bill bounced between TV shows, minor film roles, and music projects, never quite breaking through. He even formed a band, Cornbugs, with guitarist Buckethead, pouring his chaotic energy into twisted songs that felt like a carnival ride straight to hell. Then came 2003, and a second chance to burn his mark into horror history. Rob Zombie, the rock star turned director, cast Bill as Otis Driftwood in House of 1,000 Corpses. It was a role tailor-made for him, sadistic, philosophical, terrifyingly charming. Otis wasn't just a murderer, he was a preacher of pain, a poet of perversity. And Bill didn't just act the part. He became Otis, breathing life into the monster with a ferocity that electrified audiences. For the first time in decades, horror fans had a new villain to worship, and Bill Moseley was once again king of the nightmares. The success of House of 1,000 Corpses led to The Devil's Rejects in 2005, a film that turned the over-the-top horror of the first movie into a brutal, blood-stained road trip across America's rotten soul. Bill's performance as Otis deepened. Less cartoonish, more real, more raw. No longer a caricature, Otis was human, terrifyingly human. You hated him. You feared him. And somewhere in a dark corner of your mind, you might even have understood him. Off-screen, though, Bill was, and remains, something of a contradiction. Soft-spoken, articulate, quick to laugh. He's a man who knows the difference between the darkness he channels and the life he lives. Fans meeting him at conventions often remark at how kind and funny he is, a far cry from the maniacs he portrays. Bill once said, "I like being scary in movies. It beats being scary in real life." Maybe that's the secret to his success. He exorcises the demons through his work, leaving room for the man to stay whole. The 2010s saw Bill's career flourish with a tidal wave of indie horror films. Repo, The Genetic Opera, Dead Air, The Torture Chamber of Dr. Sadism, and dozens more. Some were hits, some sank into obscurity, but Bill brought his A-game every single time, treating even the smallest roles with respect, energy, and that unmistakable glint of madness in his eyes. In 2019, he reprised his role as Otis for Three from Hell, the long-awaited sequel to The Devil's Rejects. Older, wearier, but no less dangerous, Otis Driftwood returned to the screen, and so did Bill's magnetic, horrifying presence. It wasn't just a performance, it was a full-circle moment, a blood-soaked victory lap for a man who had spent a lifetime giving voice to the things we fear most. Today, Bill Moseley stands as one of horror's true icons, not because he chased fame or fortune or even critical acclaim, but because he gave everything, heart, soul, and sanity, to the characters he played. Because he understood something most actors don't. In horror, you're not just telling a story, you're becoming a myth, a nightmare, a whispered name in the dark. And in the dark corners of cinema history, where the monsters live forever, the name Bill Moseley will always echo, smiling, screaming, and scratching endlessly at the steel plate in our collective imagination. Not every giant in Hollywood is defined by superstardom. Some shape their careers by slipping into our memories quietly, one unforgettable character at a time. And if you ever found yourself captivated by a hulking figure with a surprising tenderness, or terrified by a monstrous presence with human eyes, you've already crossed paths with the work of C. Ernst Harth. Born in 1970 in Galt, Ontario, Canada, Carrie Ernst Harth grew up surrounded by the rolling fields and sleepy towns that seemed a world away from the flashing lights of Hollywood. Yet even as a boy, there was something larger than life about him. By the time he was a teenager, Ernst had already grown into a towering figure, both in stature and in spirit. He stood out in every crowd, but it wasn't just his size that drew attention. It was the mischievous glint in his eye, the kind-hearted smile that could disarm anyone, and a gift for transforming himself completely when the curtain rose. At first, acting was just a whisper in the back of his mind, a far-off dream. But during high school, the stage called to him louder and louder. Drama class wasn't just an elective, it became his refuge. Here, Ernst could be anything: a villain, a fool, a hero, a beast. It was a discovery that would guide the rest of his life. There's an old saying among actors: play your type until you make your type. C. Ernst Harth understood this instinctively. He wasn't going to squeeze himself into the mold of a leading man. Instead, he turned his distinctive look, his towering frame, and his sly humor into an advantage. Throughout the 1990s, he began taking small roles in Canadian television, often as the gentle giant or the eerie background character. His breakthrough came quietly but steadily. Roles on shows like The X-Files and Millennium cast him as menacing figures. But he always gave them a spark of something human, a sadness, a vulnerability. Audiences might not have known his name, but they remembered his presence. It was in 2001 that Ernst got his first taste of cult fame. In Thir 13 and Ghosts, he played the terrifying Great Child, one of the trapped spirits in the haunted mansion at the heart of the story. Swathed in grotesque makeup, playing a monstrous figure who was both terrifying and heartbreakingly tragic, Ernst delivered a performance that didn't rely on dialogue. It relied on movement, expression, and heart. Behind the makeup, behind the fear, there was a real person. And audiences felt it. In a business obsessed with pretty faces and six-pack abs, Ernst carved a different path, one lined with oddities, horror, and a strange sort of empathy. He wasn't just playing monsters, he was humanizing them. The early 2000s saw him taking on a dizzying variety of roles. From the minor 49 in Scooby-Doo 2 Monsters Unleashed to Barry Neiman in Dreamcatcher, Ernst showed that he could jump between comedy, horror, drama, and fantasy without missing a beat. There's a peculiar magic in character acting, an ability to disappear completely into a role. And that was Ernst's true gift. He didn't just act, he transformed. But behind the scenes, the life of a character actor isn't always glamorous. The paychecks are smaller, the fame is fleeting. There are months where the phone doesn't ring, roles come and go, and often, even brilliant performances get lost in the noise of bigger names and louder blockbusters. Still, Ernst stayed the course. He believed in the work. He believed in the craft. Friends describe him as fiercely loyal, quick to laugh, and utterly without ego. Despite playing menacing figures on screen, in person, he was known as one of the kindest people you could ever hope to meet on a set. He became a favorite among directors who needed someone who could embody the terrifying and the tender, sometimes in the very same scene. One of his most personal projects came later, when he began to venture beyond just acting. He explored writing, producing, and even teaching, sharing the lessons he'd learned through decades of working in film and television. For Ernst, success wasn't about being famous. It was about staying true to who you are and finding joy in the journey. Today, C. Ernst Harth remains one of those faces you instantly recognize, even if you can't quite place his name. He's a ghost in your memory, a shadow on the edge of a scene, a giant who isn't chasing the spotlight, but somehow you feel him there all the same. His career stands as a testament to the unsung heroes of the entertainment world, the character actors, the shapeshifters, the ones who, without even trying, make the impossible feel real. Because in the end, it's not always the leading man who leaves the deepest impression. Sometimes it's the gentle giant in the corner, the monster with a heart, the actor who, for a few unforgettable moments, made you believe in something bigger than yourself. And that is the enduring magic of C. Ernst Harth. He was born on a bleak March day in 1890, under the gray skies of Providence, Rhode Island, a city that would become both his sanctuary and his prison. From the moment Howard Phillips Lovecraft took his first breath, darkness seemed to lurk not just around him, but within him. His father, a traveling salesman, was committed to an asylum when Lovecraft was just 3 years old, raving about imagined enemies until his death. And his mother, overprotective and strange, would follow the same path years later. Madness, some whispered, was in his blood. But young Howard found escape in the arcane, the ancient, and the unknown. By 8, he was composing poems in the style of Edgar Allan Poe. By 12, he was writing elaborate essays on chemistry and astronomy. But this wasn't just a precocious child. This was a mind already swimming in deep waters, waters that no man should tread. Homeschooled for much of his life due to fragile health and what his mother called his delicate temperament, Lovecraft rarely played with other children. His world was books, mythology, science, history, and above all, the supernatural. He would spend hours in the attic library, poring over 18th century texts while the city below changed around him. By the time he attended high school, he was already different. Reclusive, spectral. He never graduated. A nervous breakdown, or so the records claim. Others say he simply recoiled from the modern world. This was the dawn of the 20th century. Skyscrapers, jazz, and progress. But Lovecraft looked backward, to ancient gods, dead languages, and crumbling mansions where time stood still. He didn't explode onto the literary scene. In fact, he crept in through the back door. Through amateur journalism, Lovecraft found a kindred network of oddballs, dreamers, and fellow outcasts. He began writing essays, publishing small stories in low-circulation magazines. His early work, florid, gothic, drenched in atmosphere, didn't fit the pulpy heroics of the time. But it was here that Lovecraft found his voice. Dagon, written in 1917, was the first real glimpse into what would become the Cthulhu mythos, a tale of a shell-shocked man recounting a vision of ancient aquatic horrors. It was eerie, existential, and deeply unsettling. Readers didn't know what to make of it. Lovecraft didn't care. In 1924, against all odds, Lovecraft married Sonia Green, a successful Jewish businesswoman from New York. The match baffled many, not least of all Lovecraft himself. She was outgoing, modern, and lived in the bustling metropolis of New York City. Everything Lovecraft was not, but for a time, they made it work. He moved to Brooklyn, tried to acclimate, even wandered the streets alone, writing letters about his disdain for the alien city around him. Ultimately, it fell apart. Lovecraft returned to Providence, alone and poorer than ever. They never divorced, but they never reconciled. Some biographers suggest he never loved her in the conventional sense. Perhaps she was a brief experiment in reality, one that failed. The 1930s were Lovecraft's most prolific years. He wrote feverishly, pouring nightmares onto the page as if possessed. The Call of Cthulhu introduced readers to a universe where ancient godlike beings slumbered beneath the earth and sea, indifferent to humanity. The Shadow over Innsmouth, the Dunwich Horror at the Mountains of Madness. These weren't just horror stories, they were cosmic revelations. In Lovecraft's universe, humans weren't the center of anything. We were ants, scuttling in ignorance while monstrous intelligences watched from the void. It was terrifying and revolutionary. While other horror writers focused on vampires, ghosts, and werewolves, Lovecraft birthed something deeper: existential dread. Though often broke and obscure, Lovecraft was never truly alone. He maintained an enormous correspondence, writing thousands of letters to fellow writers and fans. Robert E. Howard, creator of Conan the Barbarian. August Derleth, who would become Lovecraft's posthumous promoter. Clark Ashton Smith, a fellow fantasist. They formed what later became known as the Lovecraft Circle. They shared ideas, characters, even mythologies. Through this circle, the Cthulhu mythos took shape, not as a single narrative, but as a shared universe, a secret, sprawling mythology whispered through multiple pens. Lovecraft had become a cult figure before the term even meant what it does today. Lovecraft never found financial success. He lived on the edge of poverty, often skipping meals to save money. His work was published mostly in pulp magazines like Weird Tales, and he was paid peanuts. Worse, He was plagued by internal contradictions. He was a fierce traditionalist, a man out of time, raging against modernity, industrialization, immigration. His personal views, often xenophobic and elitist, have rightly attracted criticism in the years since. He feared change, loathed the melting pot of America, and believed civilization was in decline. These anxieties, warped and extreme, fed his fiction. But they also kept him isolated, even as his work gained a cult following. By the mid-1930s, Lovecraft was a ghost of a man, gaunt, sickly, and tired. He was diagnosed with intestinal cancer in 1936, but refused treatment. He spent his final months in agony, documenting the pain in meticulous detail in his letters. On March 15, 1937, Lovecraft died in poverty, buried in a modest grave in Swan Point Cemetery. His name, at that time, was known to only a few. No obituary in major newspapers, no grand send-off, just another eccentric, forgotten by the world he feared and fascinated by. Death, however, was not the end. In fact, it was just the beginning. August Derleth and others began preserving Lovecraft's writings, publishing them through Arkham House, a small press named after one of his fictional towns. Slowly, Lovecraft's name spread. By the 1960s and 70s, counterculture artists, scholars, and horror enthusiasts were discovering his work. Stephen King cited him as a major influence. Metal bands named albums after his stories. Filmmakers like John Carpenter and Guillermo del Toro openly borrowed from his vision. Lovecraft, once the recluse of Providence, had become the father of modern horror. Today, H.P. Lovecraft is everywhere. Cthulhu is a pop culture icon, adorning everything from plush toys to video games. But beneath the surface, the true horror remains intact. Lovecraft's real gift wasn't just monsters, it was perspective. He taught us that the universe doesn't care, that behind the veil of reality might lurk forces so vast and alien they would shatter our sanity. His stories weren't meant to comfort. They were meant to disturb, to awaken the primal fear that we are not in control and never were. And yet we keep reading, because in that madness, there's a strange kind of truth, a whisper in the dark that maybe, just maybe, the most terrifying thing isn't the unknown, it's the knowledge that the unknown is watching.
Lon Chaney Jr. From shadow of his father to horror icon. Lon Chaney Jr., born Creighton Tull Chaney in 1906, became a legend of horror films himself, though he initially lived in the shadow of his even more famous father, Lon Chaney Sr., the man of 1,000 faces. Early life and avoiding his father's fame. Born prematurely during his parents' theatrical tour, young Creighton was practically raised on stage. Despite his father's growing fame, Creighton took on various jobs like plumbing and farm work, hesitant to capitalize on his father's name. Following in his footsteps, however, the desire for acting burned bright. Creighton learned makeup techniques from his father and eventually took stage roles. After his father's death in 1930, he entered films under his real name, becoming Lon Chaney Jr. In 1935, a producer insisted on the name change to Lon Chaney Jr. for marketing purposes. Though uncomfortable with it, Lon Jr. saw the potential boost to his career. Horror stardom. The 1940s marked Lon Chaney Jr.'s reign in horror. He became synonymous with Universal's monster movies, portraying the tortured Larry Talbot in The Wolf Man, 1941, the chilling Count Alucard in Son of Dracula, 1943, and even Frankenstein's monster in The Ghost of Frankenstein, 1942. He also appeared in the Mummy films and the Inner Sanctum series. A legacy of horror. Lon Chaney Jr. breathed life into these classic monsters, captivating audiences with his transformations and nuanced performances. Despite acting in over 170 films, his horror roles remain his most recognizable, solidifying his place as a genre icon.
Racked by a twisted past, Frank Zito, played by Joe Spinell, prowls the grimy streets of New York City in Maniac, released in 1980. A mama's boy with a violent streak, Frank preys on unsuspecting women. His dark urges culminate in brutal murders, with scalps becoming his trophies. Back in his lair, Frank meticulously crafts a horrifying tableau of mannequins adorned with his victims' scalps. A glimmer of connection emerges with photographer Anna, played by Caroline Munro, but Frank's warped desires blur the lines between fantasy and bloodshed. As the body count rises, the question remains: can Frank escape the monstrous impulses consuming him? The movie gets a 6.4 out of 10 on the IMDb website, 40% on Rotten Tomatoes and 68% on JustWatch. Happy Mother's Day. In Alfred Hitchcock's chilling 1960 masterpiece, Psycho, Marion Crane, played by the amazing Janet Leigh, a desperate secretary, steals a hefty sum from her employer and flees Phoenix. Exhausted and on edge, she stumbles upon the isolated Bates Motel, managed by the seemingly meek Norman Bates, played by Anthony Perkins. A seemingly innocuous stay takes a horrifying turn in a now iconic shower scene that shatters Marion's world. As Marion vanishes, a private investigator hired by her worried lover arrives, followed by Marion's sister. Their search for Marion unravels a disturbing truth about Norman and his domineering mother, exposing a deeply fractured psyche and a web of deadly secrets. Hitchcock masterfully builds suspense, leaving audiences questioning reality and sanity as the film races towards a shocking and unforgettable climax. Psycho gets a 8.5 on IMDb and a 97% on Rotten Tomatoes.
The face paint was smeared, not from design but from hours of sweat, laughter, and maybe just a little bit of blood. The man behind the mask grinned wide, yellowed teeth flashing in the dim light of a roadhouse in the middle of nowhere. He was terrifying. He was magnetic. He was Sid Haig. And long before he became Captain Spaulding, the blood-stained icon of horror cinema, he was just a quiet kid from Fresno with a jazz beat in his soul and a dream too strange for Hollywood to understand. What drew audiences to Sid wasn't just the makeup or the menacing growl, it was the conviction. Whether he was on a soundstage or signing autographs in a high school gym turned convention center, Sid Haig showed up with his whole self. Fans came for the clown, they stayed for the man. Born Sidney Eddie Mosesian on July 14, 1939, Sid grew up in a modest Armenian household in California's San Joaquin Valley. His parents, Haig Mosesian and Roxy, were first-generation immigrants who had witnessed the horrific aftermath of the Armenian genocide. They brought with them the trauma of exile, but also the values of resilience, tradition, and hard work. Sid inherited all of it, along with a quiet intensity that didn't quite fit into his surroundings. Sid's early life was shaped by discipline and culture. Armenian music often played in the house, and family gatherings were filled with laughter, food, and memory. But even as a boy, Sid knew he didn't quite fit the mold. He was a tall, lanky kid with big dreams and bigger emotions. He didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened. At 7, he picked up a pair of drumsticks and fell in love. Percussion became his voice. It wasn't just rhythm, it was language. He became obsessed with jazz, studying the greats, mimicking the The pull toward acting led him to the Pasadena Playhouse, one of America's premier acting academies. There, Sid was surrounded by future legends, but even among talent, he stood out. His teachers noted his range. He could be gentle or terrifying, stoic or explosive. And his face, distinctive, expressive, unforgettable, could command attention in a second. But the reality of the industry hit fast. In the 1960s, casting was rigid and often racist. Sid's unique features didn't help him book the kinds of roles he longed for. Hollywood saw him as the other, an exotic threat to be used as background menace. Still, he auditioned relentlessly, carving out a living one supporting role at a time. He appeared in dozens of television shows and B-movies. Often, he was nameless, a goon, a guard, a henchman, but he infused every part with gravity. He refused to coast, even in throwaway roles. When Sid was on screen, you watched him. Because even with one line, he made you believe. Jack Hill saw the potential. The director was known for his offbeat, low-budget films that pushed boundaries. He gave Sid something rare in 1967, a chance to act. Spider Baby was a black comedy horror film about a deeply disturbed family, and Sid's role, Ralph, was wordless but crucial. With wild eyes and grotesque innocence, he delivered a performance that would later be hailed as groundbreaking. The film was shelved for years due to a lawsuit, but when it finally saw the light of day, it developed a cult following. And with it, Sid began to find his audience, not the mainstream, but the passionate fringe. Horror fans, drive-in junkies, film students, people who noticed. His collaboration with Hill continued in Coffee, 1973, and Foxy Brown, 1974, where he often played sadistic villains. Opposite Pam Grier, Sid showcased both menace and mischief. These weren't caricatures. They were complicated, vivid antagonists. He wasn't just a wall for the hero to punch. He had backstory in his. Throughout the 70s and 80s, Sid became a fixture on American television. He was everywhere: The Dukes of Hazzard, Chips, Fantasy Island, MacGyver, T.J. Hooker. If a show needed an imposing presence, Sid was their man. He even showed up in Star Trek as First Lawgiver, in the classic episode, The Return of the Archons. These weren't glamorous parts, but they paid the bills. More importantly, they built him a reputation in the industry as someone dependable, professional, and low maintenance. He could come in, hit his mark, deliver a chilling performance, and leave everyone on set both spooked and charmed. Yet he never became a household name, and that weighed on him. By the early 1990s, Sid had grown weary. He was in his 50s, and the offers were slowing. He turned down a major role in Quentin Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs, Mr. Blue, because he didn't want to play another one-dimensional criminal. He didn't regret the decision, but it marked a turning point. He shifted focus. Photography became a passion. He began showing his work in small galleries. He spent more time at home with Susan, who encouraged his artistic pursuits and helped him find balance after decades in the chaos of showbiz. The fans who remembered him would occasionally send letters. He always replied. For a while, Sid Haig was nearly forgotten. Then, out of nowhere, Rob Zombie came calling. A lifelong horror fan, Zombie had written a film with Sid in mind. Captain Spaulding was grotesque, unfiltered, and magnetic. Zombie didn't want a pretty face. He wanted authenticity. He wanted Sid. Sid was skeptical. The script was wild. The violence was extreme. But something about it felt different. There was space for nuance, for humor, for acting. He signed on. The production was a nightmare. Financing woes, studio demands, delays. But when House of 1,000 Corpses finally hit theaters in 2003, it exploded. It wasn't just a movie, it was a movement. And Sid Haig, at the age of 63, became an overnight sensation. Captain Spaulding was unforgettable, a clown with a cackle like gravel and a presence like a punch to the face. He was funny, frightening, and oddly sympathetic. Horror fans rallied around him. tattooed him on their skin, dressed like him for Halloween. He had become something bigger than an actor. He was now a myth. In 2005's The Devil's Rejects, Sid had the role of a lifetime. Unlike the first film, this one leaned into character development. We saw Spaulding as a father figure, a product of violence, a killer with a code. Sid poured himself into the performance. The monologue in the motel scene is considered one of the most unsettling in horror cinema, not because of gore, but because of how real Sid made it. He won awards. Fangoria called him Horror Icon of the Year. Critics who once ignored him now praised his range. Young filmmakers wrote roles just for him. Horror legends like Tom Savini and Bill Moseley called him a friend and mentor. He didn't take it for granted. Every convention, he shook every hand, took every photo, signed every fan's arm or DVD or rubber chicken. He knew what it meant to feel overlooked. He made sure his fans never felt that way. But health issues began to creep in. Surgeries, fatigue. In 2019, after an accident, complications mounted. Sepsis, lung infection, cardiac arrest. He fought. But on September 21st, 2019, Sid Haig died in Los Angeles. He was 80. The horror world mourned him like a king. Tributes came in from every corner of the globe. Rob Zombie dedicated 3 from Hell, Sid's final film, to his memory. At conventions, fans lit candles, left messages, shared stories of kindness. Section 10, The Legacy of Sid Haig. Sid Haig didn't just act, he endured. He didn't just perform, he transformed. He showed us that villainy could be complex, that horror could have heart, and that every role, no matter how small, deserved truth. He was a jazz drummer turned outlaw, a clown turned icon, a henchman turned hero. He left behind a body of work that still inspires. And for every fan who ever met him, he left behind something even more rare in Hollywood: authenticity. In the end, Sid Haig wasn't remembered because he scared us. He was remembered because he moved us. Because even under the blood and grease paint, we saw something achingly human. And we believed it. That was Sid's magic. And that will never die.
Talk to Me is a 2022 Australian horror film that has generated a buzz for its unique concept and suspenseful execution. Here's a breakdown of its strengths and weaknesses to help you decide if it's worth a watch. Strengths. Fresh take on possession. The movie uses a ceramic hand as a conduit to the spirit world, offering a new twist on familiar possession tropes. Compelling story. The plot is well paced, with the characters' descent into horror feeling believable. Solid performances. The young cast delivers believable portrayals of teenagers caught in a terrifying situation. Effective atmosphere. The use of sound design and dark visuals creates a genuinely unsettling mood. Practical effects. The makeup and special effects are impressive, particularly the depiction of the characters' transformations. Weaknesses. Overhype. Some viewers felt the film didn't live up to the pre-release praise, with scares relying more on jump scares than sustained dread. Predictable ending. For seasoned horror fans, the story beats might feel somewhat familiar. Unlikable characters. While the acting is good, some find the characters' personalities grating, making it harder to invest in their fates. Overall, Talk to Me is a well-made horror film with a fresh concept and strong atmosphere. It's a good choice for those looking for something new and unsettling. However, if you're expecting a groundbreaking horror experience or are easily frustrated by predictable plot lines, you might be disappointed. Here are some additional things to consider. The film is rated R for language, violence, and disturbing content. It's a relatively short film, clocking in at around 90 minutes. I hope this unbiased review helps you decide if Talk to Me is the right horror film for you.
They say evil wears many faces. But what if one of them smiled at you across a college campus, or held the door open as you entered your car? In 1970s America, that face belonged to a man with a charming grin, a clean-cut appearance, and a mind twisted beyond comprehension. His name was Ted Bundy. Bundy wasn't a shadowy figure lurking in dark alleys. He was the man next door, intelligent, polite, and oddly magnetic. Women trusted him. Men liked him. But beneath that mask was a predator who stalked, hunted, and destroyed with terrifying calculation. And his weapon of choice? Not a gun. Not a knife. But charisma. Born in 1946, Ted Bundy grew up believing his mother was his sister and his grandparents were his parents. That lie unraveled early, and some say it cracked something in him, though Bundy always claimed he was just fine. He studied psychology, volunteered at suicide